And now we're going to move on to Roger, who's going to discuss the changing landscape of journal publishing, open access agreements. Thanks, Roger. On to you.
Thanks, Amelia. Hi, everyone. My name is Roger. I am a collections librarian, and I'm going to speak to you a bit about how journal publishing, and more specifically, the model of journal publishing is changing with the move towards open access. Next slide, please. So in our current publishing model, as you may be aware, government funds most of the research that takes place. And that research is conducted mostly at public institutions for the purpose of the public good. Researchers then take their findings and they publish their findings kind of without expectation of compensation. And they typically do this at one of our main commercial publishers. There's a bit of a oligopoly, which means that a handful of publishers, 4 publishers, really count for the vast majority of the publications, at least on the journal side. Researchers also, through the process of peer review, are reviewing each other's work for free again. And those publishers are, again, taking this work that has been, where the copyright license, like Dave has just mentioned, has been transferred to the publisher for free. And they're taking the labor of researchers who have peer reviewed this research for free. And then they are charging institutions, so libraries, to have access to the research itself. So if you could just click onto the next slide, Amelia. So publishers are taking all of this free labor, all this free information, and they're actually charging institutions to make that research available. Now, for years, journals have operated on this subscription model, and libraries have paid millions and millions and millions of dollars for access. And while those researchers at our institutions, who are fortunate enough, I should say, they're at institutions with libraries with strong budgets, they may have access to some of these publications, but even at the world's top universities, you won't have access to everything. And if you can imagine, if you're an institution, or let's say you're not at an institution, you're an institution that doesn't have as strong of a library collection, it'll be very difficult to have access to all of the knowledge. So we've gone from having this public good from researchers conducting their research and trying to advance the scholarly record to understand, to advance our understanding of our world, to where this information really sits behind paywalls. And the open access movement has been a response to this. And the answer of this to this really is to make research freely available for readers, and hopefully also to reduce barriers to publishing. But like Dave has said, commercial publishers have really, I would say, more co-opted the open access movement, and they're finding ways to maintain the revenue that they've really enjoyed under the subscription model and in a new open access environment. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll kind of elaborate a bit on this. So this is a figure that comes from a pretty well-known study in 2015 that looks at the academic publishing market. And what we're seeing here really is just an example looking at Elsevier, which is one of the largest commercial academic publishers out there. And we're seeing their operating profits and profit margins over the years. On the left-hand side, that's across all of their journals. And on the right-hand side, that's their journal specifically in STEM. And when they're, if you can imagine, and look back, I should say, to the 1990s and the early 2000s, journal publishing was really print-based. And a lot of people thought that the move from this costly print business, which involved, some tangible products, printing costs, shipping costs, and the move from a print environment to a digital environment would actually decrease costs. We've really seen the opposite. And you can see that in both figures, that kind of from the early 2000s compared to now, profits have increased. In fact, they've doubled during that time period. And it's even more so if we focus just on the STEM disciplines. And not only have profits, like the absolute profits, doubled, profit margins have also risen. They've rose for Elsevier from 17% to 26%. And again, we're talking about a business where Elsevier is not paying authors for their content, and they're also not paying authors researchers to do the peer review. They're really just distributing their works. And this business has been a very lucrative business. In fact, the profit margins that we see here are greater than those profit margins in a lot of other sectors, including energy and banking in some cases. And we're seeing similar patterns for Springer Nature, Wiley, and Taylor and Francis. And of course, like I mentioned before, it's an oligopoly, which means that we have these top 4 commercial publishers who control the vast majority of article outputs in scholarly publishing, which means that there isn't a lot of competition, which means that the prices can stay this high. So if we can go just to the next slide, Amelia. And what this has meant, and this is just a screenshot of a report that was published by the Canadian Association of Research Libraries in the early 2010s, in the mid 2010s, is that libraries have had to deal with this environment of unsustainable journal costs. The prices of journals have increased during this time as these publishers, nearly all of which are for profit, have been looking to maximize their profits and the profit margins. And in doing so, libraries have had to cancel resources. We can't subscribe to everything. We've had to increase spending on these packages from these big publishers, and we've had to sacrifice in other places. So, for example, with our library spaces, with staffing, and even with purchasing other materials like books. It really, really is an expensive business, and a very lucrative business if you're on the other end. And with that, there's kind of this position within the academic library sphere that there is already enough money in the system. We're talking about billions of dollars a year that is spent on journal subscriptions. And we believe that we can fund a transition to open access without increasing costs, which has been the position of publishers. They will tell us that we cannot change over this journal to open access without charging us more. But we're talking, again, billions of dollars, not only in revenue, but in profit from these publishers. And that's the challenge in getting to open access. We want to get to open access. We don't think we need to be spending any more money than we have to, that we're currently spending. In fact, we think we're spending way too much as is, and the challenge is just getting there. So next slide, please. So let's talk about a couple new publishing models for journals. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to negotiate license agreements with these publishers that will cover the APCs or the publishing fees for authors at our institution. And we're trying to do that in a cost-neutral way because, again, our underlying belief is that there is already enough money in the system. We don't need to be paying more for this. Just next slide, Amelia. So the 2 main models that we're seeing these days are the transformative agreements and subscribe to open. Transformative agreements are primarily the open access model for commercial publishers, while subscribe to open is increasingly popular with not-for-profit publishers and as well with some for-profit publishers as well. And transformative agreements are deals between publishers and libraries where subscription fees are repurposed to cover both the access to the journal content and publishing fees for open access articles for authors at our institution. And the goal of these are to gradually move away from the subscription model that I was just talking about by funding open access publication through what we already pay. Subscribe to Open, again, which is more popular with not-for-profit publishers, is where libraries continue to subscribe to a journal, but if enough subscriptions are renewed in that year, the journal's content will be made open access for that year. So, for example, another way of looking at this is that if enough journals keep paying their subscription fees, the journal flips to being freely available for everyone without any paywalls and no barriers. So there are really 2 interesting approaches that we're taking. Both have pros, both have cons, but they are ways in which the publishing industry is trying to move from this closed access, from this behind the paywall state where we're paying, millions and millions of dollars a year in publishing fees to one where there's free access for everyone to read and for people to publish. Next slide. So just to show you, these are our current open access agreements that the Leddy Library has negotiated with publishers. So we have a set of open access agreements where the entire publishing fee for the journals are covered under the agreement, and we have those with the ones you see on the left-hand side. And we also have ones where there's a discounted publishing fee available on the right-hand side. There are definitely more to come. This is the new way, really, that we're licensing, and all of the publishers that are out there are looking at ways to make their content open access. Next slide. All to say that this is really, I should emphasize that these agreements are temporary in nature. The transformative agreements in particular for the commercial publishers are really seen as a stepping stone, but not necessarily the end point. They're meant to guide us through the transition to full open access, but not necessarily to replace subscription models permanently. There are some cons with the transformative agreements. One being, in kind of the conference of Open Access Week this year, it really does reinforce the power of commercial publishers in academic publishing. And with the oligopoly that we have right now, those market demands are still going to be there. We're still going to see unsustainable pricing increases. We are going to run into the cases where universities just can't afford these agreements. If you look at other institutions in Ontario, we can look at Queen's University, for example, Guelph University of Guelph. Those are both institutions, fairly large institutions, have had to cancel these big journal packages because of the price. The University de Montréal a few years ago canceled several of their big deals because of the same reason. So those market demands are still going to be there even if we move to a transformative agreement. The future vision, again, just to reinforce it, is that the publishing landscape should be an environment where research is accessible to everyone without these types of complex agreements or financial barriers, both for readers and for authors. And we are optimistic that we will get there. The solution is going to have to be a mix between commercial publishing options through these big publishers and community-led open access initiatives, things like Green Open Access and Diamond Open Access as well. There has to be really a mix, but it does require the buy-in and the participation of academics across the institution and across the academy as a whole. All right, with that, it's a lightning talk, so I'll leave it there. But if you have any questions or thoughts, happy to talk about these any other time.
So much, Roger. A great call to action to leave us on there. And I have a print very similar to this one up on my corkboard. So a great image to leave us with too, in my opinion.